Good evening and welcome to Mysterious Library. A few months ago, around Halloween, Jason and I looked at a series of films from Chad Calek, which are known as the Sir No Face trilogy. We were less than kind to those movies, so today we thought we would return to look at Chad's latest film, 74 Minutes. Are we going to be kind this time, or are we going to take poor Chad to the woodshed again? Well, you'll just have to wait and see on tonight's episode of Mysterious Library.
Good evening. It's another beautiful episode of Mysterious Library, and we're going to have some fun this evening. But before we do, Dean, how you feeling? You were under the weather last week.
Yeah, I'm a lot better. Thanks for asking, mate. Feeling happy to get to chat to you for the next hour, chat to the people in the chat. It's always a highlight of my week, or one of the highlights. This and Talking Weird on Saturday at 10 p.m. on the Untold Radio Network, 10 p.m. Central. They're my two big socialization days, talking to you tonight and Jen on the Saturday, and our guests.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that I'm the one you have to chat with, but
I
you know
love
what?
this. Love chatting to you.
So any news in the like where are you on wrapping up the Midwest Weird Fest?
Fest is wrapped, winners are announced, everybody's been notified. I go back to somewhat of a not normal, but a semi pre-festival life until it starts to get busy again, probably November-ish. I mean, we're open for submissions again. Anybody who
There you go.
makes any type of weird cinema, be it horror or sci-fi or paranormal documentaries or offbeat music videos, think about submitting to Midwest Weird Fest. We're always in the top 100 filmmaker reviewed film festivals on Film Freeway for a reason. I think at the moment we're number 42 or something. That's out of 13,000 festivals around the planet, by the way. So,
Dude, that's not bad at all.
yeah, filmmakers tend to think very highly of us. So you'll have a wonderful festival. Speaking of filmmakers who think highly of us, George R.R. Martin, the creator of Game of Thrones,
Yes.
he had a film at the festival that he executive produced. It was submitted like every other film through Film Freeway. We didn't go looking for anything. It got submitted, got selected on its merits, screened on its merits, and it won Best Short Film, starring Vincent D'Onofrio, who also directs. It's like a War of the Worlds Western mashup. It's fantastic. 30-minute short film. Anyway, it won Best Short Film. And I saw George the other day was tweeting and Facebooking saying, delighted that, Night of the Cooters won Best Short Film at Midwest Weird Fest. So when George R.R. Martin mentions the festival that you bleed out of your eyes for 5 months of the year to make happen, you're pretty happy. You're like, okay, somebody's noticed.
Yeah, exactly. I think I could do I should submit like a weird music video. I could do that.
You should do it, man.
Now, all I need to do is learn how to sing, write songs, and perform music.
Well, you're very talented.
I'm most of the way there.
Yeah, I'm sure you could do it.
I couldn't carry a tune if you gave me a bucket and a wheelbarrow on a flatbed.
I think you'd be surprised.
Oh, I'm really certain that I'm not. Anyway,
Ah,
so yeah,
what about you?
74 minutes.
Yeah, what's
I'm
happening in
just
your world, though?
literally nothing.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, just normal stuff. I'm actually working on a comic right now with
that's
a friend of
exciting.
mine. So I got a lot of pencils that are currently hiding behind my green screen. So,
Huh.
you know how it goes.
What
Hopefully
type of
later this year.
can you tell us what type of comic, what type of genre, or
Yeah.
any hints at the story?
I can. So there's actually going to be 3 stories. We're sort of making it and I'll when it gets closer, I think I'll come on and we'll when it's debuted, I'll bring it out here. But essentially, it's 3 different stories. It's a anthology comic. We're discussing whether or not one of the stories should actually be like a pulp inspired, mostly prose. But it is essentially cryptids. It's like a cryptid horror film, sci-fi or sci-fi book. So the first story is a Bigfoot inspired homage to Legend of Boggy Creek, but it's very different. The second one is involving remote viewers and psychic phenomena in the CIA during the Cold War in the 80s. The third one is essentially what happens when the aliens come and say hi in front
Huh.
of the world. It's going to be interesting. That's all I can say.
Wow, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. I'll send you a copy when they're available.
That'd be
Again,
wonderful.
this is months and months down the line. Like this is like I'm mostly pencil. I think I'm got maybe 2/3 of the penciling done for the third story. We're still working out the first 2. So, that's how you go. But other than that, nothing else.
That's big news, though. New comic from Jason McLean.
Well, I'm kind of boring. That's all I can say.
Well, not at all. But what did you think of because we haven't talked about 74 minutes at all. We never do. We tend to just
Yep.
jump on here and then we share
Mhm.
our ideas with each other and with our
Yeah.
wonderful audience.
So here's what I'm going to say is as the lead into this. First of all, it was good not to, or it was good to watch a movie or like a newer documentary that's not from the Midwest Weird Fest.
That's
Uh,
true.
it sort of reminds me that there are other documentaries out there. Um, and we're getting back to to some of those in the near future. Um, Anyway, so here's what I'll say. The aesthetic issues I had with the Sir No Face trilogy are not present here, right? The
They're not
constant
present, not present, not present, not present.
right, exactly, the constant echoes. Then he ordered coffee, 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 that kind of stuff. That's not here. This is a much more sort of straightforward project where he is taking materials from research that he's done in the last 25 years, and a lot of it even from the shows that he's been on and done. And he's working through it, saying this is, as far as he's concerned, the best evidence that he's got for this. And a lot of the stuff that isn't just, I don't want to call it recycled, but the stuff that's not from the field is him, like us, sitting in front of a camera talking, right? Um, Again, it's very straightforward. It's a very stripped down kind of a feel. And I know you're a big fan of sort of stripping things down without a lot of the pretense. So we can talk about that. But from this again, the aesthetics of the Sir No Face trilogy that just was like nails on a chalkboard for me is definitely missing from this one. It's more stripped down, it's more to the point, and I very much appreciated that aspect of that.
Yeah, and just to fill the audience in fully, the actual title, 74 minutes, the conceit
Yes.
of it is that
Hmm.
of, as you mentioned, the 25 years of investigating, the thousands of investigations, the several
Hmm.
countries and 3 different continents he's investigated on. These are the 74 minutes of footage that he can't explain that he captured in that time. Some's audio, some's photographic, and some's video. And
Yeah.
he presents to the audience, as he says in fairness, not to convince you to believe in ghosts, but to show
Mhm.
you kind of why I believe is the
Yeah.
point that he makes at the very beginning. And to encourage people to go out and look themselves, which to be honest, as an aside, I think's not the
Mhm.
best advice. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't believe me, go out and start talking to spirits yourself. You'll soon find out. I mean, I'm not sure how you should just tell a casual observer to start going and poking around looking for,
Mhm.
the supernatural opening doors they might not be able to
Yeah.
close, but call me old-fashioned. But that's just so the just to fill the audience in, that's pretty much how the thing starts. That's the
Right.
setup for the show.
Yeah, it's again, I agree with you there. Honestly, we'll probably spend a lot of time in the last 10 minutes of
Yeah, that's the
this
beef.
documentary.
That's absolutely the beef, you're right. Half of the show
Um,
should be half of our show should be talking about the last 10 minutes of
it,
that film.
it in a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of the documentary that we just reviewed a few weeks ago from MUFON, where it's like where you have this entire documentary that's again, not complaining about the documentary overall. It's kind of fine, but it's kind of vanilla. But then it's those last 15, 20 minutes where you're like, oh, now you're getting interesting here. Um, so it's those last 10 minutes of this documentary that I thought was probably the best. Um, to your point, I agree. Telling people to go look for themselves is not a great idea when you're dealing with supernatural beings and entities. In general, it's like, hey, if you've got some questions about rattlesnakes, why don't you go find a nest and hurl yourself into one? It's bad advice overall. Um, so definitely not. I'm not on board with that particular advice. Um, but I do like the idea. He's like, look, I'm not here to tell you that ghosts exist. And again, a lot of that I think is going to come in I'll save the rest of that for the second half. So I did sort of appreciate. He's like, look, I'm just telling you what I got. Right. Um, and so I at least appreciated that perspective. And he even says, look, I can't tell you that the stuff that you're going to see and hear are necessarily ghosts. This is just the stuff I don't have an explanation for. And I did appreciate that level of humility, saying, because unfortunately, there's a lot of hype in the paranormal community, right? Um,
Yeah, we should talk
yeah.
about the hype in a minute because it's actually you can't
Mhm.
talk about this documentary on its own without the current context of Travel Channel and Discovery kind of collapsing regarding their paranormal content. But let's
Yeah.
answer Horace's question first.
Which
Horace
is
Smith,
great.
a good friend and listener, and he also has been a guest on Talking Weird. He's a professor emeritus of physics and
Yes.
astronomy at Michigan State University. For those who don't know, he asks, is enough context provided for a watcher to follow what must be short introductions to multiple cases? I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. At least as much information as is needed, because a lot of it is just we're in this place and we recorded this sound, or I'm at this location and I took these photographs. I was at this location and here's the so a lot of the artificial drama that we saw with like Sir No Face, or and really in even on these television shows, because they are television shows, that's sort of stripped away and it's literally just what is recorded.
Yeah,
So
incidentally
absolutely.
incidentally, if you're somebody who likes that type of paranormal ghost hunting
Mhm.
show, you'd probably you'd dig the heck out of this film because
Oh, yeah.
you're just seeing, you're not having to wait for ad breaks and having to wait, for
Mhm.
5 minutes before anything happens. It's just, occurrence after occurrence after occurrence, the best Chad's got. So on that level, if you're into this kind of stuff, this movie would be just fantastic.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, like you said, when a television show that's got 60 minutes or 42 minutes worth of material in the average hour-long television show, what, 39 of it is filler at
Mhm,
best, right?
mhm.
This does just bam, bam, bam. There's a context, there's a setup, and then they show you what's going on. When they give you a little bit of, this is what was happening here, this is what was happening here. And there's even some material that, again, if you're a fan of his and you've seen his shows, they give you new camera angles on specific events that did make the show. So it's, again, from that perspective, he does a great job. I've got no aesthetic complaints about this at all.
Yeah, see, I'm not a ghost guy at all. Jen's the person who told me that Chad Calek's show, Paranormal State, which is referenced in there
Yeah.
frequently, and there's footage from it, as well as, you're right, other footage that they didn't use, which I'm sure is great for the fans
Mhm.
of that show. Apparently, that was a really big show. Like,
Yeah, it was.
Paranormal State was a big deal. But just quickly to the Travel Channel and Discovery stuff at the moment.
Right.
And I think why it's related to this is because there's recently, at least in the kind of Twitterverse and the Facebook realm of people,
Mhm.
throwing accusations and criticisms. There's all these ideas
Mhm.
as shows get cancelled, like Dakota Laden show Destination Fear. Actually, no, Dakota.
Yeah.
We played his film Trail to Terror, which was the precursor for
Mm-hmm.
Destination Fear, at Midwest Weird Fest in year one. I think it was the first festival screening on the planet. I think they'd done 1 or 2 screenings in
Mm-hmm.
Dakota's home state, and then I think they pretty much optioned it to Travel, and Travel picked it up as a show idea. So I know Dakota. I think he's a legitimate guy. I do like him. I don't know anybody else in the field, but I know there's lots of accusations between
Mm-hmm.
people. Like, I know Nick Groff came out recently and has made accusations against Zach Baggins, and I know Zach
Mm-hmm.
Baggins has supposedly behind the scenes said things about people, and then there's all these accusations of, well, we faked it on Ghost Adventures or something, or people are saying, well, they faked it, and Nick Groff's going to tell the world that they faked it. And I know in the past there's been some show, I can't even remember what it was, which was really pulled over the coals for having some kind of, there was clear proof that they had faked one episode or one scene or something. So when you watch this type of content, I have no reason to believe that Chad Calek is lying to me, but I also have no reason to believe that Chad Calek's telling me the truth with any of this.
Yeah, that's
You know,
yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on it. It's like I don't want to sit here and suggest that everything that he's done is fake, because I think that's unfair, and there's no cause for that, because stuff's real, right? There's enough real stuff out there. The problem is you're doing 10, 10, 12, 13 television shows. Yeah, a lot of and the worst part is oftentimes it isn't even, the stars of the show that are the problem. It's the producers. That was actually a really big thing with like Finding Bigfoot, was they all said, look, y'all ever try to fake stuff, and we walk. So that's a big thing. A lot of these times the producer like, look, we need to pop it for, get it popping for the show. So oftentimes it's not even them faking anything. It's the producers. So as far as this material, I kind of want to address it as, I do not believe that he is deliberately hoaxing anything. Only because I want to be fair to him, right? There's one video specifically, it's the one where the shadow goes up and just like disappear and just like wishes away. I have trouble believing that that's real. I don't believe that he would deliberately fake it though, right? This is where things get a little iffy. Like I said, I want to give him the grace to say that I don't believe that he would knowingly hoax anything or try and fake anybody. I think I want to work from the perspective that he is a legitimate researcher and he believes in what he's doing. I'm happy to give him that grace and extend that, because I have no reason to believe otherwise, right? But that doesn't mean that everything that was given that he's necessarily obtained is untampered, right? Because a lot of stuff is found later in post. So there's a few things that were in there, and I'm like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this particular stuff. I don't think he's doing it deliberately. But there was just a few things that I'm like, I don't know, they don't really pass the smell test, but the rest of it does. There's some there is some decent material in here, that would particularly like that one photograph of the sort of winding light, right?
yeah, the red light was that the red
Yeah.
one that they'd captured or
Well,
something? Yeah.
well, there's two of them, right? There's the red lights that were moving back and forth that they got. Which I thought were great. And then there's one where the woman was taking she was filming, it was at the bridge, right? And so there's this, what looks like an almost winding serpentine, like orange light, streak that literally, it starts like you see these little dots and then it comes down and goes around. And that's a real phenomenon that has been observed by lots of people in lots of different ways, including UFO researchers, which goes, I don't want to jump off on that particular tangent, at least until the end.
Yeah, we'll
But
get there in about 10 minutes.
we will. Yeah, we will. But like, again, there is some solid material here to say, look, this doesn't make sense from a naturalistic perspective. Like, I don't like, I know where people are like, oh, so this is not worth watching. I didn't say that. There's material in here, again, particularly the EVPs and some of these, and even some of the video that's, look, you got a hard time, again, assuming he's not deliberately faking anything, you've got some problems explaining some of this stuff.
I mean,
And
I'll quickly go so far again to say, I think
Mhm.
this really is worth watching if you like this kind of
Yeah,
material. I think this is great in its space. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not into ghost
absolutely.
shows, so to me, it's less impressive. But if you're into this space, it's yeah, it's it's certainly more interesting
Mhm.
than just turning on travel and watching a random episode or something.
Yeah, no, completely agree with you on that. It's and if you're not in the space per se, it's still worth at least saying, okay, well, what's out here, right? You don't know what it's worth watching. I would say, regardless, this is one of the shows where it's like, you know what, you should give the documentary a review, because there is some good material in here. Uh, I mean, you can. He even says if you just want to say, look, it's all faked or whatever, and walk away, that's fine, right? I think that's unfair, because some of this material does seem, again, I'm going to give him the grace to say I don't think that he would necessarily deliberately hoax anybody. There's some stuff in here that is legitimate, good evidence, and it should be taken at face value.
Well, there's a couple of things I thought were particularly good, and that
Hmm.
was the voices which didn't sound like Chad or anybody in the crew. Now,
Yes.
I think we
Hmm.
can have that haunting here right now. Now, everybody close their eyes and don't look at me. Everybody knows I'm not Southern, and Jason's Texas, so he doesn't sound Southern. So if a
Yep.
Southern voice all of a sudden happens, it's not me or Jason. So nobody watch and let's see if a Southern voice happens. Well, there, Betty Sue, get me that plate of grits. I sure am hungry. There was a Southern ghost here. Neither of us speaks Southern.
Yes.
I mean, that doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, if that's your proof that there's a Southern voice and nobody in the
Yeah.
team Southern, and there's another one, listen, I don't have as deep a voice as you, but neither of us have girly voices. So everybody
Yeah.
close their eyes. There's no women here. Well, sure, there's a woman here, sugar. What? It wasn't you or me.
Yep.
We're not women. We don't have that higher voice. So my my point
Yeah.
is, some of the evidence, whether it was real or not, to say that,
Yeah.
well, none of us had a high voice, so it wasn't any of us, or none of us have the Southern accent, so it couldn't have been any of us. That's not a way to get around, to get around saying, well, that was
Right.
definitely a genuine haunting and it was a
Hmm.
genuine ghost. So some of the rationale for why what we're
Hmm.
listening to, for example, is paranormal. And I'm not even that big I mean, I'm a skeptic, but I'm not somebody who's a total debunker of everything. But if
Yeah.
somebody approached that who seriously had a skeptical nature, and if somebody says, "Well, nobody has a high voice in our group, so how could they have been saying somebody could have said something in a high voice?"
Hmm.
I mean, you can do a high voice if you need to, I'm sure, Jason. I
Oh,
can
sure,
certainly
all the time,
do a
particularly.
bad Southern accent if I want to. So,
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
my
that's my
Southern
point.
accent is terrible. As a Texan, I'm sort of genetically I just saw Horace's comment.
I
The
convinced
voice is
Horace. See,
genetic.
now he believes in ghosts.
See, there you go. So
The
again, this
voices
goes back to
convinced me, says Horace.
exactly. Well, the voices convince a lot of people. Let's just say it that way. Um, that having been said, I again to your point, I agree. It's there has to be, I guess, the level of conceit needs to be. If it's just you and me in a room, right, and all we have is and we catch something on audio, all anyone can say is that doesn't were either of you doing voices, were you trying to hoax anything, we would say no. It's literally just our word against that, and so that's sort of the situation. Well, again, it goes back to that's the situation this whole thing is in, right? Is were you trying to hoax it? No. Okay, and your evidence that you didn't hoax it is what, right? And that, so I agree with you. The arguments like this doesn't sound like us because we don't talk like that is a little, it's thin, but we it's like we promise we didn't hoax this kind of a thing. So is it thin? Yeah. Like I said, that's why I come with it with I came to this saying I do not believe that Chad would deliberately hoax anything at all. And so some of the EVPs are different enough that it's like, okay, unless they were deliberately trying to do something, this is at least somewhat legitimate. But to your, which goes back to my point of, well, then what about the producers? And there's other ways for some of this stuff to necessarily be there. So at the end of the day, all paranormal evidence, particularly today, where with AI and After Effects being so easily obtained, you could literally write off anything as fake. Heck, you could argue at this point we should never trust anything that's ever seen on the news again, right? I mean, you could make that argument.
I think that's a pretty legitimate argument. I'm more likely to not believe anything I hear on the news ever again than to
Yeah.
I'll believe that Southern voice in the Chad clip before I believe most things I hear on CNN or Fox. Just
Yeah,
saying.
that's fair. Yep.
Anyway, I'm wondering if we should roll into the meat of the sandwich, which is the last
10 minutes.
10 minutes, really. And to be honest, that is where Chad in some ways shines.
Yes.
He does make a documentary where essentially it just is him expressing what his beliefs are, what he's come to the space he's come to or the place he's come to now as a paranormal investigator, and what he thinks of in a broader, perhaps almost philosophy. It's almost a philosophy in 3 points, really.
Yes.
And it seems to be different in many ways to the positions of the 3 documentaries, which we were particularly critical of in his last 3 documentaries, the Sir No Face trilogy,
Yeah.
where it seemed to be first there was no problem believing it was a ghost, then there was no problem believing it was an alien, then there was no problem believing there was this massive government conspiracy, and I think that's why we took him to task so much there, because the evidence was so thin for these ludicrous claims that the movie was making. It just seemed to be these really broad claims based on very little evidence. But at the end of this, in many ways, Chad steps back and is less assertive in some ways. He's more open to alternative interpretations. He doesn't seem to be beating any drum. Now, I still think some of his interpretations are wrong, and we'll get to that. But maybe we can just kick off with his first one, which was his first point he makes afterwards when he's presented most of the evidence, is he hits what he says are the 3 points that he's come to believe, or the 3 things which he thinks are important. And the first one is something he calls the unlocking key to the paranormal, which is essentially, he says, you have to believe to have an experience. And he cites personal examples of when he's taken people on investigations who don't believe, then nothing happens. And he says, well, we call them paranormal coolers in the industry. I have no idea if that's what everybody calls them or not. Maybe everybody does call them paranormal coolers. But the idea that one person there who's a real skeptic can just shut down the entire experience for everybody. And that's interesting. I mean, whether that's actually because the powers of the skeptic compels you to go away, or whether it's just there's one person there who's so level-headed when a can falls over and somebody says a ghost, the skeptic goes, no, see there, you hit the door and it knocked the can over. You know what I mean? Who knows why that cooling effect happens? But I'm sure it's probably pretty legitimate. I bet you often, if you take somebody in there who's all bluff and not at all, doesn't follow along in the mood at all and doesn't play along and isn't all interested, I'm not at all surprised that it slows things down.
So I'm going to be both on this one. There's as
I don't know how to fix it. I accidentally bumped
it. I'll fix it. It's fine. I can do it because I'm magic.
You are magic, Jason.
There you go. If you're listening on audio, you'll have to see it. You'll have to see it on video to understand why.
The show sometimes too.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, to your point, this is again one of my big complaints about a lot of paranormal research is that it really does lock up in people's feelings, particularly when you start getting to people who are mediums and sensitives, and they're like, "Oh, I'm like, oh, I feel there's something here." It's like, okay, so let me get this straight. You've been telling yourself this is a haunted location, and you're going at night. You're going with creepy lights, and now you've convinced that kind of stuff. I think is the psychology of this is absolutely real, right? And it's absolutely real as far as the psychology, and I think a lot of groupthink, and that's a real phenomena. That's definitely part of this. So your point that perhaps people who are skeptical, sort of killing the vibe and the mood, I think is legitimate. I think that's absolutely part of this. However, as someone who is a bit of a cooler, even though I do believe in the supernatural, and I have no problem with believing in the supernatural, I've got, again, similar friends, Christians who do research on, cryptids and other things. We can go out in the field and people can have paranormal experiences around us, but we don't have them. And it's not because we're not looking for it, right? I think the problem can often be, I think the problem can be both. I think a lot of times it is psychological, but I think also there is a real legitimate effect to having people, again, I'm not a non-believer. So there is oftentimes, I think, some other things that can cool off a particular site, but that does go to link back to that MUFON conversation from a few weeks back, right? One of the things they talked about was why there were differences in they were noticing differences in the brain scans of people who were abductees and contactees, that they seemed more similar to people who were practicing remote viewing. That was an interesting admission on their part.
Agreed.
So it is entirely possible that maybe there's an aspect to this that, and again, which is why I really like this last 10 minutes. He's like, look, I'm open to alternative possibilities here. It may be that a lot of this paranormal phenomena is not necessarily always separate supernatural entities, but maybe some kind of psychic phenomena created by
Us.
the observer, right?
Yeah.
Instead of observing and interacting with a independent thing, you may just be creating the phenomena yourself on some sort of psychic level. Again, not saying that's what it is, but if the cooling effect is real, and I'm here to tell you that it is, because I'm one, then we need to entertain the possibility that maybe there's something else going on. And again, for those who are in the paranormal community, there's been a long standing, and some people just accept it outright, but a long-standing theory that a lot of what you would call poltergeist activity is actually psychic in nature and not necessarily a haunting from an intelligent entity, but is rather oftentimes, in fact, usually connected to teenagers. But the teenagers going through, hormonal changes that they go through, and that most of us who are parents wish that murder was legal from time to time. Is like that all can also somehow perhaps manifest some form of psychic phenomena that is perceived by everyone else as poltergeist activity. That's a big theory in the community. Well, if that is the case, then it would also stand to reason that maybe some of these hauntings and other stuff is paranormal activity is actually us somehow creating it on perhaps through collective belief or some sort of psychic manifestation. But it does lead open to this other possibility that perhaps these coolers are indicating that this is a much more complicated phenomena than what we're perceiving it as now.
Chad should have had you in the last 10 minutes of that documentary, because that was more convincing. Your point.
I'm too pretty to be on Chad's show, man. Come on.
You're an attractive man, but that's a good point, that maybe one person, if there is a circuit, say, and this is just, trying to use some very crummy analogy, but if it takes a circuit of energy from people, or a circuit of belief even, maybe you only need one person to short circuit that. And that could be by short circuiting it psychically, or it could be just short circuiting the kind of group mentality that's required to invest in what's presenting itself as well, or what's allegedly presenting itself. So yeah, I think that's from both the point that Shad makes and then your more in-depth explanation. Then I think it's definitely worth considering. Of course, he also talks about, and then he uses an example about a time when they were investigating a house which supposedly had some demonic entity in it. And I think Chip Kofi, who was one of his co-stars on a particular episode of some show, did St. Michael's Prayer, and then the FLIR camera picked up as soon as St. Michael's Prayer was spoken, when he was kind of, using St. Michael's Prayer to kind of exorcise the being, whatever it was, the heat register increased, and there seemed to be something, that it actually affected in the room. Again, I'm not so sure about that anyway. I'm not so sure if something else might have made a FLIR camera, all of a sudden.
Right.
But who knows? But my point is, yeah, so he kind of extends it maybe even into a broader belief pattern that, yeah, if you're out there and you think, he doesn't
Mhm,
say exactly this, but what he's implying is if you are out there with a
mhm.
Catholic mindset and you think it's a demon you're exorcising, then maybe the thing will present itself as a demon. And I think
Yeah.
some of that, there's some legitimacy in that
Mhm.
as well. It's certainly in line with things that some of the people that we seem to admire on this show, like John Keel and Jacques Vallée,
Yeah.
have suggested that there's a some type of methodology where
Mhm.
we feed into it, like you were saying before, and maybe we don't just feed in our belief so something manifests. Maybe when we believe in something, it manifests or presents, or we project, however you want to say it, what we
Mhm.
expect it to be. So yeah, I think it
Yeah.
again. So the first point, I think we're not really beating Chad up on. I think
Yeah.
I've been a bit of a bad cop most of this show, and you've been a pretty fair good cop, but I think we're both pretty good copping on that first point for the most part.
Yeah, I think he makes a valid I think it's a very valid point. It's a conversation that does need to be had in more depth in the paranormal community. I mean, just straight up, in my experience, most people it's like, no, you can't even question where this material is coming from. It's always real phenomena. No one's ever, everyone's above reproach. And it's like, guys, come on, we need to have a much more in-depth conversation on this. It can't just always be this one perspective. So I very much appreciate what Chad was saying. And to your point about the FLIR video, there is a long history of FLIRs acting up. Not just the FLIR itself acting up, but seeing anomalous material. Um, that is, anomalous heat sources and cool sources during prayers, things of that nature. Not necessarily incantations, but prayers and statements by religious authorities. There is it is a known phenomena. So there's something going on.
The one and only Ed Schultz just he did a number of comments. Of course,
Mhm.
Ed Schultz was an exorcist. He was an exorcist for
Yep.
Ed and Lorraine Warren. He used to be known as the psychic priest, and he said some of this sounds like shades of Ed and Lorraine. Ed suggests that sometimes I don't want to give away much of what he's writing in his book. He's writing wonderful memoirs at the moment about his
Mhm.
experiences with the Warrens and his other psychic experiences. But I don't think I'm telling tales out of school, but he suggests that sometimes the Warrens had certain expectations. And when you go in with certain expectations, you can
Yeah.
often get those, expectations jumping up. Speaking of, you and I, Jason, we should have Ed on and do something exorcist related. Maybe we could
We
do The
should.
Exorcist.
There you
We
go.
should do that. We should do the film The Exorcist, or maybe a book about the war. We'll work out what it's gonna be. Let's think about what we're gonna do, and
Yeah.
then have Ed Schultz to talk about
Yeah.
exorcism and that kind
Absolutely.
of stuff with us. I hope you can drop a comment if you'd be interested in doing that, Ed. But, one other thing, just while we're talking about Ed, Ed always jokes about the Peter Pan, "I wanna believe in fairies" things, or I believe to save Tinkerbell."
Yeah.
Maybe that has something to do in
Mhm.
seriousness, though, about
Yes.
the idea of the fair folk as well. Maybe people see things like fairies more often,
Mhm.
old, those type of old entities in areas where the belief is higher. Maybe that's why in areas of Iceland, areas of Ireland, people still see
Mhm.
these things because people there still expect to see them. And it might
Yes.
be why we see grey extraterrestrials on a highway next to their flying saucer in America or something, because that's what we
Yeah.
expect. So maybe it
Well,
is all about belief.
and again, it's not like we haven't talked about that ad nauseum. That the phenomena itself is manifesting how in a way or presenting itself in a way that's acceptable to us. So I think yeah, again, we've talked about that ad nauseum on this channel, in particular this show. So I think that's something that we do need to take into consideration.
I agree.
Um, Real quickly though, I don't know if I think I've told this story before, but on the I do believe in fairies. I was at a play, nobody clapped because it was a bunch of high schoolers, and we were all sort of forced to be there. Nobody clapped at all,
What
and
happened to Tinkerbell?
oh, she died. No, they ad libbed the whole thing. They killed like they just put the light out, and she's like the actress playing Peter Pan's like, oh no, but I believe enough, and then they popped the light back up, and so Tinkerbell came back on the play, but like nobody clapped. Now everyone clapped afterwards, like because they was like, okay, you earned this. Um, but like
Oh
nobody
my
applauded. I
goodness.
love that.
Goodness gracious. Horace Smith just said these ideas sound testable in principle. Speaking of that point, Chad hits on that in one of his other 3
Yes,
points, which we're going to get to in a minute. But that's very
he does.
insightful, Horace. I feel bad for Tinkerbell in that play, though.
I don't
My
know.
goodness.
I think the glittery tart had it coming.
Oh, Jason, you're breaking every child's heart out there in Middle America who's listening tonight.
Nope.
No, Doug really is
You
going
and
to
I
ban the
both
show
know.
after
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
you
goodness.
and I both know no kids are listening to this show.
Probably, that's true. Past their bedtime, they should be in bed anyway.
Exactly.
Okay, so the next point was something that Chad called future science. And he
Yes.
kind of says, he does this little kind of bit where he says, what is a ghost? And what he means when he says he believes in future science is that there
Yeah.
are multiple dimensions and space and time crossing, all these vaguely scientific type of terms, wormholes. And what we're really talking about is string theory here. And
Mhm.
it all, when people start talking like that, it's always a little, I don't know. It's a little. It's a kind of. It's almost like it's almost like an intellectual shortcut to start using quantum physics, which you probably don't understand. I don't understand quantum physics. I don't pretend to understand quantum physics, but I notice
No.
a lot of people in this space start throwing around terms which are quantum physics terms. Horace Smith probably understands quantum physics. Maybe we should talk to him about it. But anyway, his point, though, I do agree
Yeah.
with the actual point of it, throwing all
Right.
that pseudo scientific terminology overboard, is that how do we know ghosts are really spirits of the dead anyway?
Right.
Maybe there's from another dimension, or maybe
Mhm.
there's something else. That part I agree with Chad on. What I don't agree with Chad on is the idea that a future science might work this out. I have no idea. In fact, Fort tells us that science will probably never work out any of this. And so I think some of Chad's point here about we just don't understand it yet, but maybe a future science will understand it, which I think is his point,
Yeah.
is again, like most people in this field, just throwing Charles Fort overboard. I tend to think that these things are never going to all of it, not suddenly. I don't think they're ever going to be opened up by science. I don't think science is ever going to get there. But that's because I'm a Fordian, so I'm skeptical of that. And
Right.
that doesn't make Chad or myself correct. It just means he has more faith in the scientific institution ultimately perhaps
Mhm.
working out what this is because of the quantum physics, which maybe Chad understands it better than I do. I think very few people probably
Mhm.
really understand it, but maybe he does.
Mhm.
Whatever the case is, science has shown no indication that it's going to crack the UFO code or the ghost code or the cryptid code, or more to the point, that the ghost hunters and the Sasquatch chasers and the UFO believers are going to be able to knock on the doors of the scientific academy with some type of,
Mhm.
amorphous evidence in their hands, and all of a sudden the doors are going to open. And I think Chad appreciates that part as well. But the whole future
Yeah.
science thing just seems to be legitimate, hoping that one day there'll be the scientific legitimacy that there isn't today.
I love the fact that we're going to both be the good cops ish on this, but we're going to fight about it because I agree, but I disagree with you.
Oh,
Um,
excellent.
so real quick, because this is so let me on one point that we completely agree on, and Horace's comment about quantum phenomena. I was just throwing it up there too. We hit the button at the same time. Um, I want to. So this is a sticking point. I may have to come on talking weird and rant about this one day.
Oh, let's do it. Sounds good.
Uh, I have a big problem anytime I hear things like the quantum Bigfoot, right? So much of this is that there are um, people throw Star Trek. They literally use scientific words the same way Star Trek did, right? It's a photon torpedo. Well, if you know what photons are, that makes zero sense. But they just sort of figured nobody knew what it was. And then when they're doing the new series, they're like, then they created quantum torpedoes. What makes it a quantum torpedo? We don't know. It was just that was the cool new scientific buzzword to throw out there, right? It's like what in the original trilogy, right? The Millennium Falcon, and it made it in 12 parsecs. That is a measure of distance, right? And of course, when they did the solo
Fantastic.
movie, they had to make that line make sense because it's not it's not about time, it's about distance. But the point is, a lot of times people do use scientific jargon in way because they maybe understand in a very superficial, this is what's put on the news kind of way, and it is the appeal, to your point, to the academy, right? It's But if we use this word, then maybe it'll allow us access and credibility to the academy. My problem with that is, okay, you're saying this creature can move between parallel dimensions and it can become intangible through quantum. It's like, so what you're saying is a being that originates from another plane of existence that is not entirely made up of material that is native to our plane of existence. Yes, great. You just described an angel, right?
Right.
Like oftentimes it is the attempt to avoid using language that already exists. So I agree. I think we're in agreement on that. However, this is where I'm going to disagree with you. I do think that there's no way for us to know what science will develop in the future, right? If you went back 600 years and said, guys, in the future, we're going to develop a technology that will allow us to see animals. So I know I use this metaphor all the time, but it's an easily sort of obtainable metaphor that's going to allow you to see animals so small that's invisible to the naked eye, right? And if you had gone back and said that 600 years ago, everyone would look at you like you're insane, right? Fundamentally, if these things are real phenomena, and it's not just all of us having some sort of weird hallucination, right? And I don't think that we are, that all of us are. If it's a real phenomena, that at some point,
Maybe I'm just having a weird hallucination. Everybody's just part of that
we're all
hallucination.
part of your
Oh,
hallucination.
no,
Dean.
no, wait a minute. I'm going to talk to the one person out there who's real. This is all an hallucination. None of us are real. Somebody out there probably. I shouldn't actually. No, I take that back because somebody might take that really seriously. I was just being silly. There's an X-Files episode like that, remember? Jose Chung's from Outer Space, where the gray alien is like the Air Force pilot dressed as a gray alien. He's like, he's smoking a cigarette. He's like, I can't tell you if this is real. I can't tell you if I'm real. I can't tell you if anything. This is real. And I think this is where you and I differ, perhaps a little bit, although I agree with much of what you say. Sometimes when I drift off into the broader realms of, philosophical ponderings, I get close to Ed's Shakespearean quote here. There are more things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in our philosophy. I tend to think it might be so strange that it almost is undecipherable, that it's ineffable, that we're never going to get to the heart of it. And interestingly, Chad does touch on that point on his third point.
Yes. Can before we get to the third point, though,
I absolutely will let you have the final word on this point.
Because you have a great point there, and I think there's, again, slightly different perspective on this. Someone who spent a lot of time in the lab. There is a difference between fully understanding a phenomena and at least being able to measure it enough to know that the phenomena is there, right? And right now, what we do not have is a reliable way to observe the phenomena in a reliable and objective sense. That's the problem that we have right now. It doesn't mean we won't be able to observe at least some aspect of it in the future. In fact, there seems to be technology coming along the way that I don't want to speak out of school. I'm just going to say there's some stuff that's looking really interesting now that we have we're developing equipment that's being used in ways where you're like, hold up, we shouldn't be seeing this kind of thing, right? So it's possible that we're getting to that point where we can have the Spookatron 5000. Now, does that mean we'll understand the phenomena from a scientific perspective? I'm not saying that we can, right? But there's a difference between being able to say there is a phenomena and then understanding what that phenomena is. I think there's a break there. But here's where I think we both agree, and I hate saying this because I'm the jaded and cynical one in this group. I'm the jaded one, but I think you're right. And I think this is to your point. You don't think that the academy, the official scientific community, will ever look at this and say, we accept you and your information and your data so that we can work this phenomena out for ourselves and with you, right? I agree. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's different from being able to scientifically observe the phenomena.
Yeah, I see your point, but I don't think the scientific academy will ever grasp it with that scientific objectivity, which doesn't exist. I
It
really
doesn't
don't
exist
think.
anyway.
I think if the academy grabs it, it'll grab it the same way it grabbed any paradigm. And
Mhm.
as Kuhn said, very much like Charles Fort before him had said, is that science is a conversionary and a revolutionary process.
Yes.
Ideas become popular because they're ideas that are put
Mhm.
forward
Yep.
and jumped on by the most popular kids in the class, essentially, and then the rest of science gets on board and then works inside that paradigm. So once a paradigm's popular,
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's any more correct. Say the paradigm now is there's no such thing as ghosts. And one day the paradigm is there are ghosts, but they're from the 26th dimension or whatever, right? I'm just
Right.
making some ridiculous claim. Then science will have to
Mhm.
operate under the assumption that ghosts are from the 26th dimension, or
Yes.
most of the scientists working within that paradigm, because there's a paradigm which has been set. And that was what Thomas Kuhn's point was. It was also what
Yeah.
Charles Fort's
Completely
point was
agree.
almost 40 years
Mhm.
beforehand. And I'm sure
Yes.
Horace probably, who is a legitimate hardcore scientist, probably is like, Dean's just talking nonsense. But as
Yeah,
a
he's got a
Fortean,
baseball bat too. He's taking a baseball bat to his picture of you that he keeps on his desk. He's
he
probably got a
probably
picture
should.
of me. He's probably got a picture of me on a dartboard. He just keeps throwing them at me, which is legitimate.
You're closer to Horace on a lot of points than I am, because I'm like that total anti-scientist in many ways. Like I'm
Mhm.
literally, I can't say I'm a perfect Fortean because I'm not, and and one of the reasons is my Christianity would stop me from being a 100% Fortean. But my philosophy is very close to Fort's when it comes to
Mhm.
science.
Yeah.
I'm very reluctant and skeptical to accept that it has an ability to tackle any of this, because I'm somebody who studied not science, but the philosophy of science. So I have an
Right.
understanding of how science historically works. And
Mhm.
it's not going to open up all of a sudden, because Chad Calek, as he himself says, and the point we need to get to, has a
Yeah.
video or something that is almost 99% perfect, because there'll be that 1% thing which gets
Mhm.
thrown overboard. That's Chad Calek's point. That's not actually the reason science won't take one of his videos
Mhm.
seriously. The reason science won't take one of his videos seriously is because, as Charles Fort said ages ago, and Thomas Kuhn said
Mhm.
really also ages ago now, but 40 years after Fort said it, is it does not fit the paradigm. It isn't really what
Yeah.
Chad says. So let's just roll into point three, I'm guessing. Point
Yeah.
three
Right
is
there.
the other side. And
Mhm.
Chad starts by talking about the other side,
Mhm.
saying that no matter how good our evidence is, and he cites the Sir No case of the Sir No Face case, which I think is horrible evidence anyway, but that's the one he cites as being lots of
Yeah.
really good evidence. The Australian government were involved, which is kind of a weird way of looking at it anyway, or government sanctioned, he says, and even that won't get us over the line. And there's nobody's going to really,
Mhm.
we're never going to get, science just will never take us seriously, because no matter how good it is, there'll always be that 1% aspect which isn't quite right. The video will always be a little blurry, but that
Mhm.
isn't why science won't take it seriously. Science won't take it because it doesn't fit the paradigm. But
Yeah.
that's, in fairness, we've already talked about that, and that's not Chad's main point. What his main point is what he says next. And so this point's
Right.
called the other side. And his point is, it suddenly dawned on me after I had that thought of why science won't take us seriously, or why, we
Mhm.
never have enough evidence, why it's always a little blurry or not quite there. And that is because he's very sincere now. And I think he really is. He's very sincere. He's
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
I think that's because if I could prove with one of my videos that there really were ghosts, if I could prove it
Mhm.
scientifically, or if science could prove it, we wouldn't any longer need faith.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
a in a way, it's true, of
Yeah.
course, but that's not the reason. In a
Yeah.
way, of course, if all of a sudden science proved that there was an afterlife, or science proved there was another side, maybe you wouldn't need faith. But that isn't the reason that science isn't accepting it. It isn't because there's some metaphysical barrier that all of a sudden, if one of Chad's videos proves there really are ghosts, then the whole concept of faith will be destroyed. I think the where he is correct, and again, Chad might be more correct than I am. This is just my opinion, which I've talked
Right.
about for a long time. I think all of this phenomena is
Mhm.
essentially unexplainable, ineffable, unsolvable, however we want to say it, because that's the psychological need that it fulfills, whatever it is. I think it's almost the inversion of what Chad
Mhm.
says. I think we almost need to have something out there, no matter how real or how real it isn't. we're never going to crack it because we're not meant to crack it. Not because it's going to break down the barriers of faith, perhaps, but because this reality, there are things on this side of the veil and there are things on that side of the veil, and it's
Mhm.
just the way it is. That other phenomena, I think, is all related. The reason it's not going to be crackable by science is because there's never going to be a Bigfoot body. There's never going to be ectoplasm which stays in some pure form which you can test. There's never going to be a physical metal ashtray from a Roswell crash because there isn't a physical metal craft that crashed. All of this stuff comes and goes and is ephemeral. So science can't tackle it. It isn't because there's a wall which says, we're not going to let you
Mhm.
destroy faith, which is kind of what Chad implies. But at the
Right.
same time, Chad kind of is right. I'm just coming at it from a different angle to him.
Yeah.
So I can't beat up his reason why, although I do totally disagree with it. I
Yeah.
mean the
Oh,
why,
this
but I
is
but I agree. I
Mhm.
agree with the idea that there are these two sides and you can't get over it. And we might have different reasons on why, but it's
Y
very strange anyway.
and
So
here's where
sorry.
we reverse again, because this is the one I completely disagreed with him on. I both agreed and disagreed with him, but I think, again, our 2 points, you and me, our points of agreement and disagreement are gonna be different again on this one. Um, yes, to your earlier point, I agree with him when he says, to your interpretation of what he's saying, where it's like, hey, it really is ultimately about paradigm, not because you're destroying faith or you're proving this to their side. I am sympathetic to his point about there being, it's not just that there isn't enough scientific evidence, but rather that the there is opposition to this phenomena being real because of the implications of it being real. It does, like, again, if there is supernatural phenomena, then the materialist worldview is inherently wrong, and everything that comes out of it is inherently wrong. I'm very sympathetic to that because that's basically my point about a lot of this. Again, about a lot of this phenomena is that the reason is it's not just, oh, we don't have enough scientific evidence for it, is that the paradigm won't allow for this stuff to be researched because it just shatters so many paradigms that it's not just the paradigm, it's the overall worldview becomes completely wrong. And that's what's being protected. So I am sympathetic to his particular view on that. I agree with him, at least in that respect. But this is where I radically disagree with him. His point's like, well, is that it would destroy faith, and we need faith to maybe give us meaning. And it's like, hold on. There is a radical difference between knowing that there is a supernatural world objectively, and then the faith that is needed to live out, whether it's, whether you're Christian or Hindu or Muslim or Jewish or agnostic. Those are not affected by whether or not you can prove that there is some other form of supernatural existence, right? And even if you could say, look, some of this is, that these are spirits of dead people, great. That doesn't change faith. Because I think this is where fundamentally you and I have a little bit of a disagreement on the prospect of science, right? I always see science as limited by what we have the ability to observe, right? It is limited by what we can see into the universe, and our ability to observe it and test it and know it. And the history of science says every time we make a big advancement, we find out everything we knew was wrong. And then we recalculate, we go and we build better, newer things. We use the information we do have to make something better, only to find out that everything we knew was wrong. So again, the understanding, being able to say, look, scientifically, we can confirm that there is some kind of supernatural existence. I don't think would ever take away faith or meaning to life, which is what he's clearly saying. I vehemently disagree with that entirely, because the entire predicate, the most religious belief is predicated on the idea that there is a supernatural existence. Like, that's the starting point. Then you take that next step, because at fundamentally, the teachings of religion is that, look, there's only so much we can know from our perspective. Someone has to reach over from that side and give you information, right? Through revelation. Everyone sort of agrees on that. So I do disagree vehemently on his belief that if we got the evidence, for the supernatural, that would destroy faith. I think that's I'm gonna be a little uncharitable on this one. I think it's not. I think it's, let me phrase it. I just think it's wrong. I don't want to be uncharitable. I think he's just wrong. But there's an observation that when he's talking about how maybe the reason the evidence is never really good, it's always just off camera or it's always just out of focus. You know, he's saying, well, it's because if it were to be proven, then X. I'm saying no. Maybe the reason it's always out of focus or it's always just off the screen or it's never just enough is because it's an intelligent phenomena that is making certain that you aren't observing it clearly enough. And I think that's a perspective that every paranormal researcher and cryptozoological researcher, any Fortean researcher really needs to take into consideration. Maybe the reason you aren't getting that evidence is because it doesn't want you to have that evidence. And that really should tell you a lot. Because again, as I keep mentioning, we don't have the Spookatron 5000 patent pending. And until we have that, we have no anything we pick up with, audio, visual, whatever, Geiger counters. It really does seem it's like that's what it wants us to have. And if it has that level of control, then anything you're actually even picking up is in itself subject to scrutiny. Not just, oh, it's fake or it's a misinterpretation, but rather that's only what it wants you to know. That's what it wants you to see, which means you're not maybe seeing it for what it really is. And that's a bigger issue. I think that the paranormal world has not really, really the entire Fortean world has not really come to terms with, because whether it's Dogman or Bigfoot or UFOs or the paranormal or whatever, the idea that I saw this thing, therefore it must be this thing. You don't know that what you saw is what this thing actually is. That what you encountered is what it actually is. It just may be that's what it wants you to, or again, maybe that's what it wants you to know. That's what it wants you to see. Or perhaps, again, to your point, perhaps your presuppositions are imposing that on whatever this thing is. So back to Chad's point, perhaps really the reason that you're never going to have that perfect evidence, so to speak, maybe it's because it's an intelligent phenomena that doesn't want you to have that perfect evidence, that doesn't want you to get that really crisp and clear picture, or is always going to be just a little out of focus or a little off frame.
I think that's very insightful. I suspect also, and this is another not un-Fortean, but an alternative interpretation, not necessarily a Fortean one. And of course, I think any real Fortean is always suspicious of the scientific establishment and even scientific methodology. So anybody who calls themselves a Fortean and then spins around and tries to use some type of scientific methodology or talks about science is kidding themselves. Call yourself something else. You're an anomalist, maybe you're interested in anomalies, but you're not a Fortean. But I often have wondered, and this is a mind game really, or just it's a nice theory to throw around, if the type of things you're talking about, or the type of things Chad's talking about as well, the difficulty for us to get to the base of some of this stuff, might not lend to not a matrixy simulation theory, although that's obviously the one which most people are most familiar with, but perhaps we're living in a non-base reality, as Elon Musk would use the term base reality.
Yes.
Perhaps our reality, there are things interjecting into our reality, and why we can never get a handle on them is because they're not from this reality. They go out again. And they leave trace evidence, just like I would leave trace evidence if I reached into a fishbowl and messed up the castle on the bottom of it and knocked over the fake palm tree or whatever, right? But then I'm gone. There's nothing left of me really, to make, well, what came in there? What did that? Something messed it up.
Right.
And I think maybe somehow we're dealing with something like that, something that comes in here, sometimes leaves trace evidence, whether it looks like something from a UFO landing pad, or whether it looks like a tree a Bigfoot's knocked down, or whether it looks like a footprint from a Bigfoot, or whether it looks like a Dogman scratch on a Windows screen, or think of the type of evidence which this entire field retrieves, but there's never anything which is ever going to be enough for materialist science to get a handle on anyway, because it's
Right.
not here. It's coming from somewhere else. So
Yeah.
that's the type of things I think about when I wonder, why can't we get a handle on it? One, I don't
Yeah.
think science is up to, because of the whole paradigm, which Kuhn talked about, and Fort talked about using a different term other than paradigm, but he talked about the same thing. And secondly, if it's not from this space anyway,
Mhm.
then how can we possibly get a handle on it? Any more than a fish can get a, just suppose fish was super cerebral, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Any more than a fish could get a
Mhm.
handle on what happened when, something knocked over its castle, because there's
Yeah.
nothing left there. Where, I don't know what, it's gone. Something came in, whirlwind, and it's gone. There's no test they can do to
Mhm.
replicate that hand coming down and knocking it over, until I decide,
Yeah.
you know what, I'm going to stick my hand down there and knock something else over. Until then, there's nothing
Yep.
the fish can do.
Yeah, no. So again, very sympathetic to that viewpoint. In fact, I tend to agree with that viewpoint. I always laugh every time I hear someone talk about simulation theory in general. I'm like, congratulations, you've rediscovered theism. You know, because to your point, again, if there is a supernatural world, then the problem is these things are coming from that plane of existence into ours. They are not native to our plane of existence, and so I am very sympathetic to your view of, hey, then science isn't really maybe able to deal with this phenomena the way electricity or gerbils can be known and understood, right? We can poke them all with scientific sticks. We don't got the Spookatron 5000. However, I'm slightly more optimistic about that. I think I think there's a difference between recognizing a phenomena and understanding the phenomena. I think that's our little point of conflict there. But again, to Chad's point, uh, you know, I think he's right that maybe we're never going to get that perfect evidence. I would just take that extra step and say maybe it's because it doesn't want us to have that evidence, right? And I think that's something we need to uh, talk about in this community, and understand it from that perspective. Maybe this is just more complicated than people think it is, or and again, I know I keep going back to the whole 600 years ago, and bacteria and microbes and germ theory stuff, but the simple fact of the matter is, you go back 600 years, why people got sick, germ theory wasn't on the table. Nothing close to germ theory was on the table, because it was so far outside of what everyone was thinking the world was like. That's why it was on the table. I would just suggest that perhaps at some point in the future, there will be a time when there will be an answer on the table, because we will have some way of saying, hey, there's this new thing. And then maybe we need to, and it'll tell us perhaps of new ways to look at the world. To your point, maybe the biggest problem is that we fundamentally misunderstand the physical universe on a base level, right? And I think I'm, again, very sympathetic to that view, because I kind of agree with it. Again, I have a supernatural worldview, which means this world is not what we think it is. So, um, again, I think in overall, the documentary is worth watching. I think I find it interesting that we both agree and disagree with him on numerous points, but the points that we're agreeing on, we're disagreeing with why we agree with him. I love it. It's worth, again, anytime you can have that kind of a conversation, I think it's you've done a good job in having that conversation as far as the documentary goes. So yeah, I go give it a watch. If you got Amazon Prime, go for it, please.
Yeah, it's interesting because at least this time, at the end of that film, I feel like could have a conversation with Chad. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like in
Yeah, yeah.
in the first 3 films, the very literal interpretation of everything was so
Yeah.
far afield from my position that it just
Mhm.
seemed he was somebody chasing literal explanations, which to me just seemed so mundane and nonsensical and silly, really. But
Mhm.
yeah, in those final 3 points in this documentary, I mightn't agree with where he spins those points to, but I think the
Right.
questions he's asking, which launch those points, are valid questions.
Yes.
And you get the impression that, yeah, Chad's open to talking about this kind of stuff. He's not
Yeah.
quite as cemented in the very mundane type of explanations for the
Mhm.
paranormal that perhaps we were unkind and accused him of taking before. And I feel like, also in fairness, this time I wasn't almost dying. Well, I wasn't dying. I was super sick last time as well.
Yeah.
When we did it, I think I had COVID or
Mhm.
something. I was bad anyway. I was sick.
Yeah.
I was hopped up on
You were sick. Yeah.
I was hopped up on cold medicine. I was just in a nasty mood, and I was like half delusional.
Mhm.
I was like, these movies were horrible. But yeah, this movie isn't horrible. I have a number of problems with it, but at the same time, if you like paranormal documentaries, you'll
Yeah.
enjoy this. And those last 3 points, yeah, I don't agree with where the points went to, but I think the questions which Chad
Yeah.
was asking at the beginning of the points were legitimate questions to be asking.
Yeah. No, completely agree. Again, if you've got Prime, go give it a listen, or a review. Wonderful. Well, it's been another great episode over here at the Mysterious Library. Reviewing, it's always nice to review something that, maybe, again, allows you to ask some questions and have that conversation. So I know I had a good time. I'm glad you're feeling better. To our poor, long-suffering audience, thank you for suffering through this. We appreciate y'all. Y'all are why we do this, and we love y'all. So do like, follow, subscribe on all the things on Untold Radio AM, because there's a lot of great shows going on here, a lot of great creators having really interesting conversations. So hang out, stick around, check some of them out, and make certain that you are sharing us out. Inflict us upon the world. Why should you suffer alone? On that note, we will catch y'all next time behind the card catalog. Night.